clearly there was something horrific happening here.
From small-town beauty queen to accused murderer, this Georgia teen is now out on bond after allegedly killing her boyfriend's toddler.
How awful certain human beings can be to other human beings, especially very vulnerable young babies like this. It's hard to wrap your brain around.
Now we're learning more about the gruesome way the young boy died. We first told you about this story last month when 18-year-old Trinity Poague was arrested. She now faces multiple charges, including felony murder, aggravated battery, and first-degree cruelty to children. Before posing for this mugshot, she posed for a beauty pageant shot like this one when she was crowned Miss Donaldsonville 2023. She also competed in the Miss National Peanut Festival last year. But now, investigators say this small-town Georgia beauty queen knowingly killed her boyfriend's 18-month-old son. The boy's legal name is Romeo Angeles, but his family refers to him as Jackson Drew. The Georgia Bureau of Investigation began looking into the case on January 14th, when the toddler was pronounced dead after being rushed to the hospital. A medical examiner later determined the toddler's cause of death was blunt force trauma, and Poague was subsequently charged with his murder. Georgia criminal defense attorney Meg Strickler has been following the case since it broke. Even weeks later, the details continue to shock her.
When you read the blunt force trauma, when you read those words, blunt force trauma, I can't elicit anything friendly in my brain. I think of horrible things happening to this little tiny baby. 18-month-old is still tiny in the sense of being able to defend themselves. So, and as you saw, she's charged with aggravated battery. So clearly there was something horrific happening here. And we may never, ever know all of the details, but the medical records, when they do the autopsy, will show some things and they can guess what occurred. And we don't know those things yet. But what you just see right now is those terms, blunt force trauma. And all I do is think of really horrible things.
So that is the big term that we're hearing a lot, is the blunt force trauma, because we don't know, as you said, all of the details. But what could blunt force trauma be?
Well, I was thinking about, it could be, and again, I'm just telling you from prior cases I've done. I'm not saying this is okay, but there are times when you can shake this kid so much that you're so angry with an 18-month-old that it shakes their innards. So it can cause some damage, internal damage from doing that. And there's a lot of science involved with that. There's also where the baby could have been pushed down the stairs, something like this. I keep saying baby, I should say toddler, but whatever. Could have been pushed somewhere, could have been pushed and fallen down, could have been pulled and then pulled and shook over this way. I mean, there's so many scenarios that occur where you might be fighting with the 18-month-old to get something out of his hand, and then you're being an abusive person, and then you yank the entire child across the room. I mean, you would be surprised. It makes me upset to even think about it, how awful certain human beings can be to other human beings, especially very vulnerable young babies like this. It's hard to wrap your brain around, but it does occur.
More than a month after her arrest, Poague was released from the Sumter County Jail on bond. $75,000 cash bond. What do you make of that? Do you think that's an appropriate amount?
So no, it doesn't bother me at all that that's a $75,000 bond. That's very normal. It's a small county in the rural parts of Georgia. So numbers are usually a little bit lower than bigger cities. More importantly, they gave her an ankle monitor. And that is a trend I am seeing even in Atlanta, is to get them out of jail and put them on a monitor, because the technology is so good that you can see when a person moves across the room these days with these GPS monitors. It's almost creepy.
One of the things that I saw about that ankle monitor is that she is allowed to leave Sumter County, but she does have to wear this monitor. Is there any stipulations besides that? Would she be allowed to leave Georgia, let's say?
Normally, there's a lot of conditions with an ankle monitor. It's effectively your own house arrest. You're like a dog on a leash, effectively. And I'm not trying to disparage somebody, but that you just want to analogize the thought process, that they're basically not able to do a whole lot. So you can go to church. If you're on dialysis, you can go for medical, things like this. but you got to travel somewhere, you've got to ask for permission from either the court or the person who's monitoring you. So either the monitoring service, or you'll have what we call a pretrial services person who will be monitoring you, a probation person. The term of art changes per county. That's why I'm using the terms interchangeably. So when you're on monitoring of any sort, i.e. a GPS monitor, ankle monitor, there's a human being behind it as well, monitoring you.
Poague was released on bond last week, and as Strickler explains, she had to pay the complete $75,000.
Normally, if it's a $75,000 cash bond, the term of art here in Georgia would be cash bond, she would have to pay the whole $75,000, and somebody would give you a property bond. You could bring your deed and say, I'm paying that, or you bring in $75,000 direct, or you get a bondsman. And the normal, if the judge didn't delineate a straight cash bond, which I don't think occurred here, she can go to a bondsman and pay about 15% to the bondsman, and then they post bond for her. So that's what, maybe $10,000 that she would have to pay-ish.
And the first time we talked about this story was about a month ago, several weeks that she has been in jail. Why now would she suddenly have bond?
My guess would be is that what normally happens is that when you're arrested for a charge like this, you don't get bond within that 72 hours because we have laws that don't allow you to get bond right off the bat. You've got to go to a higher court, and that's Superior Court. My guess is either A, she had the bond hearing at Superior Court, or B, her lawyer worked with the prosecutor and they came up with a consent bond, which is we're both agreeing, judge, this is what we think the bond should be, and the judge signs off of it and she gets out.
Investigators haven't released all the details of the case, so we're still unclear what led up to Jackson's murder or exactly how he was killed. What we do know, based on her charges of felony murder, aggravated battery, and first-degree cruelty to children, investigators believe the child's death wasn't an accident.
I'm just leaping as a defense lawyer that there is a line here that was gray at the very minimum, because they never would have arrested her if it had been, let's suppose a scenario where the baby was sitting in a high chair and somehow managed to leap out and land on his head. She would have called 911 right then and there. There would have been a storyline that we would have already heard. And so I've kind of gone to the gray area because that's a black and white storyline where that's an accident. I have a feeling this is at the very minimum gray, which is she may have a story and a defense, who knows, but there's some stuff over here that's not matching over here, and that's why they charged her with the crime. So we don't know yet how strong the evidence is. We don't know yet anything, but there has to have been gray for the government to have charged her with these kinds of charges and then keep her in jail for a month. And then more importantly, I do judge the severity of a case. The ankle monitor and the $75,000 bond means we're not screwing around here. We're continuing with this case.
Does that so-called gray area that you were talking about lead to the potential that Trinity Poague could have a strong defense in this case?
There can be a defense. You said strong. I'm not going to go with strong, but yeah, there could be a defense here. Let's just suppose that the medical story that the coroner is able to describe in court, a year or two from now at trial, the defense would hire a medical expert, and that expert might read those same records in a different way and say this is from an accident, and then it would be up to the jury to decide. So that happens all of the time. What can happen here with technology that may hurt her, don't know what story again, is if she texted the father and said, something in the past, like, I hate your kid, or, I don't know. If there's other corroborating evidence for the government, that's going to make it difficult for her to have a good defense. If there's no corroborating evidence and the only evidence we have are these medical records, she's going to have a stronger defense.
As far as Poague's relationship or history with Jackson, we don't know much, except that she was dating his father, Javante Smith. As I'm wondering, is it possible that he could face charges if he knew, let's say, she hated the child or had a history of being aggressive, things like that? Is that possible?
It's possible. In this scenario, I don't know, because she's only 18 years old. She couldn't have had too long of a history of violence. We haven't heard of anything. But we don't know. What if, yeah, he knew and put her in the care of this child. He can be charged with, reckless conduct. He can be charged with some stuff. I don't know yet, but there's been no mention of that yet. But that is always possible, that if you put somebody else in the care and that person could be an absolute drunk or, whatever, those stories would make then this person be guilty of in contributing to that death.
The murder happened in Americus, Georgia, where Poague was a freshman at Georgia Southwestern State University. Strickler says her status as a student and even potentially her pageant queen background will be a factor in her case.
In any case, I don't care, whatever case I've ever had my entire career, when you have somebody who's young, literally doesn't matter what the storyline is, it is taken into consideration always. And, she was in college. That's admirable. One of the things I hear from judges more often than not is, was she, before this incident occurred, on a positive trajectory in life? Those are the terms the judge uses. Was she on the right road prior to this incident? And you know what? In this circumstance, she was. She was in college. She was furthering her life. She was going somewhere. Where, we don't know, but she was going in a forward trajectory. Those are the terms that I hear judges use often. And then I echo that when I'm arguing for them. So you better believe her age, the fact that she was in college, never been in trouble before. We know she's never been in trouble before. There could have been some juvenile instances, but remember, that's not ever accessible to anybody unless there's something really grave out there. Then legally they can bring that up.
As for what's next in the case, Strickler says it will head to trial, but not for a while.
Well, since she's out on bond, my guess is the preliminary hearing that may have been scheduled, like for the future, is now canceled. So it's going to be kind of a lull time for a minute or two until she's formally indicted. So that could happen, I'm going to assume, in the next 6 months to a year. So pretty soon. And so once she's indicted, then things kick back into into the high gear, so that we can do the motions to suppress, motions in limine, whatever motions could be possible in this case, to try to argue some trial issues prior to trial. I will tell you confidently, these kinds of cases almost always go to trial because of the grave, she's facing murder. I mean, so she's not going to plea it out unless the government drops it down to something very much like probation. But even then, so we're going to go to trial, but the trial would probably be this fall at the very earliest.
But Strickler says we won't have to wait until Poague's trial for more details about the boy's murder.
I can virtually guarantee we'll have some details in motions hearings. And, when this occurred, people can file an open records request, and we can ask for the report, but there's a thing called a narrative that they keep quiet. So none of us can get the narrative, and the narrative is what happened. And so those pieces of evidence, none of us out here in the world, except for the defense lawyer, can get. But when we file a motion to suppress and we're bringing in folks to testify, yeah, that's going to be out there in public court. We're going to learn more details, and some of those details could be quite sad.
And you mentioned testimony. I know, again, we're very early out, but is it possible that Trinity Poague would take the stand in her own defense and we could hear the story from her?
It's very possible. And I don't know. I would hope that there was a 911 call by somebody. Maybe it was she. So then she could add more data as to how that call occurred. No idea. She could also kind of mea culpa a little bit in a hearing. I don't know what the hearing would be, why she would testify, but at jury trial, she could testify to say, I may have done X, but I didn't do Y. Now, I don't know what I don't know what she could testify to that would help her, because you would have to say, I didn't hurt this kid at all. Because remember, felony murder is doing the cruelty to children in first degree. So she'd have to testify that they would have been none of those things. And remember, cruelty to children, all of them, there's 4 levels. There's at least 3 levels. I'm sorry for not remembering. You can be yelling, and that's cruelty to children 3rd degree. So she'd have to be so low beyond that to not inculpate herself. So I don't see what could she testify to. Does that make sense? When you're trying on a case, lesser included of cruelty to children would be a jury instruction. So you wouldn't want your client to testify to something that's going to make them be guilty of anything.
If convicted, Poague could face 25 years to life behind bars. She's pleaded not guilty to the charges. We reached out to her and the family of Jackson Drew for this story, but have not yet heard back. Reporting for Law&Crime, I'm Gillespie.